Hey guys, what's up? RossDunneIE. So I'm going to continue talking this for most of this week, in fairness, about sort of the reactions that people are going to have or have been having towards events that have been occurring, obviously from Paris and then continuing onward, the sorts of conversations that people are having in the wake of Paris, and specifically focusing on our general reaction to Paris. You'll notice I'm not wearing glasses today because I broke my glasses again. I'm basically incapable of keeping a pair of glasses because I'm an idiot klutz. But whatever, I'll live without them. Today I want to talk about a specific article cross-posted to Salon. Of course we're going to talk about Salon. By an individual named Mark Sundin. And I'm not so much interested in even the contents of the article. For some of you it might annoy you, for others not so much. The content is somewhat controversial, but the point of the matter that I kind of want to make about it, and I'm going to read the article out, we're going to switch over to a content view, is that it's okay to satirize some aspects of the conversation that we have about social justice, and it's not okay to satirize others. I'm going to read the article, I'm going to comment on some of it, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about something else as well. So we're just going to flick over here. So this is an article by Mark Sundin, and it was linked to originally on salon.com. And it was tagged as satire, obviously, but it was tagged as a bunch of other stuff as well. And I'm just going to read it. I'm just going to read it out for your benefit. And then we're going to talk a little bit about it. A modest proposal to end terror on American soil. Deport white male Protestants immediately. An open letter to President Obama and all candidates for the President of the United States. The violence of recent months has brought America to a moment of reckoning. We must decide who we are as a people, whether we will coddle terrorists in the name of so-called civil liberties, or stand firm to protect our women and children. These recent attacks have been characterized by barbarous sadism that can't be attributed to any ideology, but rather it's a streak of pure evil that we might call suicidal and even tribal bloodlust. Let me be clear. I am not racist. I have friends of all races and religions, and yet political correctness cannot erase the grip that the fact that the authors of these atrocities all belong to the same race, creed, and gender. Columbine massacre was committed by white male Protestants. The Aurora Theatre massacre was committed by white male Protestant. The Sandy Hook massacre was committed by white male Protestants. The Tucson massacre was committed by a white male Protestant. The Roseburg massacre was committed by a white male Protestant. The Charleston massacre was committed by a white male Protestant. The Oak Creek Sikh Temple massacre was committed by a white male Protestant. The Yistro McDonald's massacre was committed by a white male Protestant. The U.S. Austin, Texas Tower massacre was committed by a white male Protestant, and so on. The policy of containment has failed. From its early days, America has pursued policy to continue this dangerous race institutions such as Ivy League universities, state legislatures, and the United States Congress, where they would do the least harm possible to women, children, and people of color. However, WMPs eventually infiltrated nearly every aspect of our society, successfully executing such heinous terror plots as enslaving Africans for 400 years, stealing a continent and murdering millions of Indians, enforcing Jim Crow segregation with mob lynchings, beginning in the 1950s when it was evident that our great metropolises had been overrun with cells of WMPs. America began the most ambitious and expensive resettlement program of the modern era, shipping millions of white Protestant boys along with their sisters and parents out of city limits to a ring of white-only colonies. Here young WMPs were left to harmless diversions such as Little League, video games, and paintball contests, based on the theory of removing the threats constituted by the advances of women and brown people would mollify the murderous rage that had fueled terrorism over the centuries. Alas, the experiment has failed. Selective enforcement is impossible. In recent decades, WMPs have orchestrated terror plots from within the safety of their enclaves, then burst into unprotected citizen zones armed with easily obtained paramilitary gear, assault rifles and grenades, bound to one another by an invisible network of suicidal terror. These criminals often work within cells of a single member, making it nearly impossible to trace and track them back to a mastermind. Indeed, experts on international terrorism dispute shadowy organizations of white male Protestants oversee these attacks. Some posit that the terrorists are directed by the National Rifle Association, while others claim that cells take orders from a single white male Protestant warlord, such as George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, or Donald Trump. The only reasonable solution is to immediately deport all white male Protestants between the ages of 17 to 35. Let's bring barges and ships to our ports, load them with WPMs, and shove them off. Liberals will surely object to this type of roundup smacks of racism, and of course many of us have met white male Protestants in our school or workplace who do not appear to be murderous terrorists. But the risks are simply too great. How could we possibly evaluate each and every white male Protestant in America to make sure that he harbors no plots to murder kindergartners and their teachers? As long as WMPs are allowed to freely roam our streets and communities, our women and children shall never be safe. But where will they go? Generations of inbreeding has created a waste of WMPs highly skilled at tasks like social media, video games, and trading stocks, yet unfit for useful jobs that the host nation desires, such as farming, cooking, cleaning, and building. We must be prepared for the possibility that other nations will turn boatloads of refugees at their shores. At the risk of sounding heartless, that's not our concern. I say let them drift across the oceans until they figure something out. When barges approach the shores of Mexico, Syria, Somalia, and Bangladesh, these violent, freeloading psychopaths will once and for all become the problem and responsibility of somebody else. So, that was that. I mean, the irony of this whole statement is that it's not entirely untrue, but not for the reasons that the author obviously intends. If you look back towards the past in American history, it was a minority of individuals who honestly didn't come to conquer. They came to resettle. The white Protestants of Western Europe came to America to resettle. They did not necessarily come to conquer. They did as time went by, and effectively the Empire of America was constructed, but it still resulted in a relatively benign influx of immigrants to American shores, which really, really, really damaged the majority of the population in the end. Now, I agree that America should be taking a role when it comes to the Syrian refugee crisis, and America's unwillingness to take a role when it comes to the Syrian refugee crisis is honestly pretty disgusting. America helped to create the problem. America must be partially responsible for solving the issue, but America just doesn't seem to want to be interested in that. But in many ways, from what I've been reading from a lot of sort of regressive leftist news media over the last few days, is nothing short of American moralizing to Europeans once again. Americans consistently fail to grasp the concept, or at least some of the more left-leaning and even the right-leaning ones consistently fail to grasp the concept that America has done nothing but export a social and moral ideology to Western Europe for the last 50 years. It genuinely has. America cannot be told that its moral value system is not necessarily compatible with the rest of the world. If any European dares to wage some sort of concern about large influxes of individuals who may not necessarily have anywhere to live in Europe, Americans are quick to pull the buck and accuse Europeans of racism or what have you, or whatever is really necessary for them to keep up their moral baseline. Ultimately, the mass influx of migrants in Europe has had significant consequences for the migrants themselves. Don't get me wrong, I understand that these people are escaping a war-torn zone, and it really is our responsibility as human beings to be able to help them as best we can. But Sweden is about to face a problem where its welfare system is no longer able to support these individuals, and it keeps taking them in despite the fact that it doesn't have homes for them. Ultimately, these nation states of Europe are small and somewhat isolated. Europe doesn't really operate the way America does, and not every nation in Europe has the capacity to be able to house these people. Why take them from a place where they're not safe and move them to another part of the world where they're not really going to be safe either? I can admit that a big city that, even with the lowest quality of living in Europe, probably still has a better standard of living than somewhere in the middle of Syria right now, but we still don't, a lot of places and a lot of cities don't have the facilities necessary to house people of this, it's in this amount at least. It's not that we can't, it's not that we shouldn't give of ourselves. I really feel that we should. And I'm not willing to say that the refugee crisis, realistically, if there's going to be reasons to try and stem the flow of refugees, it's not because of terrorism. It's because Europe's systems are already quite weak, and I'm not really confident in our ability to absorb these people and support them for whatever period of time is necessary for them to begin the process of social integration with Europe. I do have concerns, obviously, about a large swathe of individuals whose cultural values are completely different from that of Europeans, and whose faith, Europe is not quite a place of faith anymore. It really is quite a secularist and atheistic continent at large, and Europe's way of life cannot move backwards to accommodate faith. I'm sorry, it's not pleasant to hear, but Europe is increasingly an atheistic society, and it is not the duty of atheists to take care of theists, and it's not the duty of atheists to make sure that people of faith are accommodated and that their religious views are taken care of. I really don't believe it is. Certainly it's the duty of atheists to educate theists on, quite frankly, the fact that they're fucking wrong. But beyond that, we owe them nothing. Atheists owe people of faith nothing, and I will not stand and let that happen. Realistically, if you want to say the Christians owe them something, fine. You can drag whichever number of crusades you want into, which, by the way, many of them were called for. Let's not forget about the Proto-Ottoman empires and their constant incursions into Romania, and 2 odd million people that were dragged out of Europe and sold as slaves in North Africa. Nobody seems to give a shit about that, but that's a story for another day. But ultimately, it is not up to atheistic societies to accommodate theistic cultures. That's how I feel about it. And as for this fucking article, again, if you phrase that under any other circumstance, if you change or tweak that even slightly and tag it as satire, nobody's going to tolerate it. Nobody's going to tolerate it. Salon and Salon's cohorts and a specific brand of regressive leftism is entitled to a form of satire that, when pulled behind, it's not really satire. It's kind of ironic, because it's an ironic sort of twist towards a feeling that people actually do have. It's a kind of like, I'm gonna mask my hatred through just being able to go, hey, it's a joke. I've seen it so often. I see it on Reddit constantly, see it on Twitter all the time. It's like those dudes who run up to brothers in the hood and start like slapping them and shit, and then go, whoa, it's a prank, bro, it's a prank. You're asking for all sorts of shit, and people are going to see this and they're going to react to it and they're going to call it out, and then Salon's writers and the writer of the content originally is just going to sit there and go, it's actually satire. Funnily enough, it does. I was actually going to say that it doesn't say that it's satire on the medium.com site, but it does. Either way, it's stupid, and people get away with people, depending on your political ideology, you can get away with a lot more than you can with your other one. The worst part about this is I agree with all of it. I agree with more or less every single aspect of leftism. Consider myself leftist. I consider myself liberal, but above all else, I'm about fairness. And fairness in satire and fairness in commentary is not equal. It's not being given to certain groups over the web. Anyway, that's all I've got to say about this for today. Tell me what you think, guys, in the comments, and feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. I'm RossDunneIE. Peace.